Okay, I completely got sidetracked with media over the actual scene in this previous lesson. It's dealing with matte paper, but look at that sheen to it that you get from, not that I was going for it, but when you start utilizing alcohol inks, it really kind of seals off the paper from this matte cardstock, and it created a floating layer of dye-based inks being applied on top of it. It's like, you know, applying water-based paint over the top of an oil paint. That water-based paint is going to, you know, be floating, basically. It's not going to be in liquid form or something like that, but it'll sit on the top surface of something because you've sealed off, essentially, the surface with an impenetrable medium. And in this case, it happened to be, you know, water over alcohol. But anyways, let's just, I don't know, I really feel like kind of doing some experimentation after that. So let's go around. I really want to utilize some more alcohol inks with my dye-based inks here. So let's actually do kind of more of a finished scene, and it'll be a lot more exploration, though. In media, but I want to do it on matte paper too, because I really want to kind of play with that dynamic of two different types of incompatible, seemingly, in terms of mixing mediums here. So, let's see here. This, again, is just using nature set number 9. There's some little scuff on my paper, but I always tell people, you know, when you're working in this type of format of, you know, finishing off compositions, what you get in the compositional aspect of it, or what you start off with in these little tiny things like that, I don't believe really matter, you know, because after I stamp out all these images here, you know, I'm not going to just leave it as is. I mean, some people like doing just composing. They like black and white, and they don't like doing anything to it because they just get a kick out of the combination and blending of imagery, working out different types of composition using their existing stamps and whatnot, and that's the fun of it for them. In which case, you know, you might see kind of some irregularities if you don't cover it up with something, but, you know, under normal usage or whatever, you know, where someone stamps something out and colors it with something, you know, little tiny details aren't really going to matter. They don't matter to me, at least. Okay, so that was the Lakeside Cove off of this set. These also come individually as well. This is the Pines and Rocks Small, and the trees are larger. So therefore, if you watched some of my composition videos, generally things that represent something closer to you are typically lower on the horizon. That's just how they do, you know, typical artwork in kind of Western perspective. I guess in Eastern perspective, things that are lower and higher. I think things can represent different time periods and whatnot, or the passage of time, which is kind of interesting. Okay, now I'm just stamping some of these. I'm not stamping the whole thing, but I'm just kind of stamping them a little bit lower. off the page. You can see where I've stamped them right here, okay, off the page. So I'm not using the whole thing, so it just represents something a little bit closer to us. Okay. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm kind of creating our perspective. If I stamp these down there like that, it means that we're, you know, probably on some higher ridge, you know, or something like that. And looking down at this lake right here. And oftentimes what I do too is I'll leave a little space and opening for our kind of visual passage or visual path that we might enter the scene from when we're looking at it. Not that, you know, it would be bad if you stamp something like that. It's kind of the difference between photography and like landscape painting or drawing or something like that. You can kind of, well, you can completely customize your landscape to whatever you want. So this would be kind of a visual kind of entranceway that I can create in a stamped piece here, as opposed to doing something with photography. So one of the things that I would always say is, you know, why try to replicate something that the camera can do so much better, okay, and faster and whatnot? We're not trying to replicate that, or I'm not trying to. I'm trying to reference some things, you know, in terms of lighting and things like that you would see in the natural world, but I see these more as like stages, so I want, you know, I often leave a little bit of space down here. And it doesn't have to be centered, it could be off-center or whatever, just for your viewer to enter, you know, because what you do is, if you kind of see some opening somewhere, if you're out walking around somewhere and you're just in dense brush somewhere, you tend to follow kind of the open spaces or something like that. Or if you see an open space, you know, down a road or something like that, it makes you curious to know what's kind of around it and kind of the nature of our, you know, character, you know, as far as like curiosity goes. We're kind of creating that curiosity or whatnot. So, you know, if we see an opening in some trees, naturally we want to go right next to the shore or something like that and stand there and gaze upon this open lake or whatnot, right? But if it was all kind of blocked off or something like that, and you can't see a little bit of an opening or something like that, then maybe we wouldn't even know that that's there, aside from, I don't know, maybe some sound or something like that. But we would typically go, you know, follow the path of resistance or something like that, and go to that, you know, in that open space right there, as opposed to bushwhacking it through a bunch of trees. So anyways, that's just kind of the psychological aspect of, you know, leaving an open space like that. And you can always create that 100% of the time when you're stamping, because you can make your scenes however way you want them to, as opposed to something in photography where you're, you know, you're stuck with whatever you're given. So you're trying to maximize the, you know, your whatever your composition based on existing forms out in nature. Okay, so total tangent there, but anyway. Okay, I stamped this a little bit off. Things were getting a little bit, or a lot, you know, very, very symmetrical. I stamped that one image right here, right center, and then I have this opening in the center, so I put that a little bit off center. I don't know, just for some variation. It's not something that has to be done. And if you want to, you can get a little bit of extra texture in here. What I do is I kind of wiped off the edge like this. Okay, I don't want two moons in here, but let's see if I can get some of these extra clouds kind of in this open space right here. If I do get a little bit of extra moon, I'll darken it in on the surrounding area anyway, so it's not going to matter. But with sky imagery, again, it's kind of a good idea to wipe off a little bit of the edge like this, you know, because we're talking about a, you know, rectangular shaped image, and we don't want to have a bunch of rectangles in this space right here. We want seamless transitions with everything. For everything, that goes for, you know, every image in here. So there's a lot of overlapping in here. And the only masking I did was when I stamped out this moon, because this moon is a little bit more space down here, and I didn't want to get that texture into those rocks very much. I mean, if I did a little bit, it wouldn't really matter. with what I intend for this composition. And my intent for this composition, there's nothing really kind of hard set right now, okay? There's going to be a lot of variation, I'm sure, that's going to take place, but that just being said, I don't really go into it something with a really firm kind of idea of the end results. And again, this one right here, I plan on using some different media in here than I'm, maybe used to, or a combination of media. All right, so I put that little solo Canoeist right there. I kind of double stamped it there, so I got a little bit of that tip right there on there. Most of the times I'm using unmounted varieties of, or incarnations, I should say, of my stamp, so I kind of didn't compensate for that 1/8 inch, so when I was kind of positioning it, I touched it a little bit. But again, that's not going to matter there. Okay, so this is our basic foundation right here. All right, now here's what I'm just thinking of, just in terms of a general concept right here. If there's a moon or some sort of a light source within a scene, sorry, I want that to be the lightest thing in the scene right there. So if I want that to be nice and light and really stand out, then I have to take the area around it and make it darker, okay? And see down here, like along this water line, it gets a little bit darker. The tops of the rocks are lighter, the bottom of the rocks are darker. So I might want to put some shadow down here, being, created by that light being backlit. Okay, so you can see the shadows down here already. And you see the bottom of these rocks are darker. So it doesn't have to be a big mystery as far as how you can light something. If there's a light source in there, keep it light and make the area around it darker. And then if you have some kind of little subject matter, it's like a stage or something like that, put a spotlight on them, meaning don't darken them out, with a lot of dark tones around it. But you can bring some lighter tones around it, but just, in general. Okay? All right, so let's think about some kind of process right here. Let's work a little bit differently too, because I want to keep in mind the kind of what we're going after right here. I think I'm going to oscillate it a little bit. Okay. So with my stylus tool, if you've watched my recent video on those, Clear Snap is no longer going to be in business. I think they're still open, probably fulfilling some some of their remaining orders, and they are not going to be around for very much longer. So I did get my last order from them, which I'm glad they fulfilled, because I wasn't quite sure, because I figured a closing company, you might get a lot of workers kind of, jumping ship as soon as they find new jobs or whatnot, but these are still being made, or these are still out there, but I don't think they'll be made anymore. They could, and I have hope that someone will kind of pick up a lot more of the Clear Snap line, or their product line. I don't know how that's going to work, because they're owned by Stampin' Up, so I'm hoping that they kind of retain some of their, the products. I guess if Stampin' Up's around, I gotta imagine that they'll make their own pads and accessories. Okay, so this is tumbled glass, okay? Just a distress ink, dye-based ink. You can use a pad and just dip into your pad. I just put some on my tip right like that, and I feel that this makes it nice and quick to apply, okay? It looks pretty good on matte paper though, doesn't it? Matte cardstock, I should say. I typically use glossy because I just figured glossy is just like one extra step in terms of intensity, which is the brightness of an ink. Value, you can get a little bit darker with glossy cardstock because the ink kind of sits on the surface of the paper a little bit more. There's an extra coating. and things can get a little bit more intense, again, because that ink is sitting a little bit more surface-oriented than getting, absorbed into the paper quite as much. But matte looks pretty good too. I do like matte. I'm not against matte at all. I just think the ceiling of glossy with certain types of looks is just higher, okay? The feel is a little bit different, of course, as you can imagine, applying ink into a matte cardstock than with glossy. Okay, now sometimes I don't want my moon to be so stark white. I want a little bit of tone over it, so I typically go over it with my lightest color. Okay, so the difference between going back to the glossy and matte is just from a textural standpoint, I could feel it's different. This is a sponge applicator right here, and I can just feel it has a different feel, okay? The inks don't kind of glide quite as easily, but it's not hard by any means. Okay, so this is Broken China. This one's a little bit darker, so I'm just kind of moving up a little bit darker incrementally. You don't need too much, We have some of the ink from the tumbled glass still in this one. You just kind of ink it up like so. And I would be using the pads if I had the pads for those two colors, but I don't. So when I ordered these, I just figured I'm going to get, I'll get more colors than an ink pad and the re-inker, if it was going to be one or the other. I had to buy a couple re-inkers for my other pads that I have, but with some colors, other colors, I figured I'm just going to get just the re-inker for it. Because if you're not stamping something out with an existing color and you just use the pad for the color itself, I figured I'm going to get more ink in a re-inker than I am in a pad anyway, so why not just get the re-inker? And when you're using things like the stylus tool, this essentially becomes like a pad on a wand, so it's just really easy just to put the ink directly into this. I don't know, it seems like it cuts out kind of a, one of the steps for me. And it just holds so much more ink when you're just, dipping into a little thing like that, a little puddle, and applying it that way. Okay, so remember to retain some of those lighter areas, if that's what you want, meaning the moon and this little reflective area down here. You have to kind of watch out. This is about the time, when you move into about this area of darkness here, this is about the time when a lot of people just completely lose their retained light areas because you go into it and it was like, oh, that was a really dark color, and it's suddenly all dark in there, okay? If you do that with kind of some of your really light tones, it's so light it doesn't really matter too much. But the darker tones do leave an inherently darker mark, of course. Okay. See, on some of these rocks down here, they're still reflecting some of that light because they've retained their lightness like that. See, isn't that kind of nice rather than just coloring them all in? We have this area of light within the sky, within the rocks, and within the lake, which is, they're basically like three areas, right? It's like background, midground, foreground. This area down here is foreground, but if we kind of include this whole space right here, it's like 1, 2, 3 spaces. You have dark and light, dark and light, dark and light. Okay? It doesn't have to be equal. They don't have to be equal players, okay? But the thing is that all of them have a range of value, though, right? Even if it's the smallest little bit, you're going from something completely light to something completely dark. Okay? And that kind of creates, potentially, okay, you don't have to have this in everything. There's many, reasons why you don't in some things. Like if you're doing a completely nighttime, thing with no light at all, then, maybe we wouldn't have that kind of light down there or something. But, or you're just doing things for some kind of emotional effect, you want it like super dark, you're doing a Halloween thing or something like that, and you want, really black or something like that in some areas. But anyways, from a visual perspective, having a range of things from light to dark, dull to bright, maybe even sometimes temperature, warm to cool, you're just extending kind of the visual range of those given areas, and that can potentially add up to a richer surface just because of that range within each area, okay? And that's just one way to do things again. If you're working with pastels or something like that where everything's kind of soft, the consistency of that softness and, kind of lack of, really bright intensity can look nice too, It's just kind of all kind of whatever you're going for. But again, contrasts tend to, play a pretty big role in terms of the variety aspect of things. Okay, now I'm just going on with Danube Blue. I'm kind of adding in some additional tone in here and making it a little bit darker. The darker you take your darkest areas, the lighter the light areas will seem by contrast. We're not working with like a flashlight underneath here, where this is kind of glowing with actual physical light, okay? So what we have to work with is contrast. So if you want some areas to look a little bit lighter, then you just take the areas at random and make them a little bit darker, okay? Alright, so I haven't forgotten about my pens, but let's keep adding some of this tone into these areas. Okay, this is black. It's really forgiving for me. Kind of surprisingly so, but not terribly surprising because I have used a lot of ink right here. But see, when I add this black down here, I am able to kind of blend it out really nicely. So there's plenty of time to kind of play around with it. When I say play around with it, I mean kind of blend it out. It's not a fixed like shape like that would be, where that can't be moved at all. So if I put it right here, right, see how I can just kind of blend it out? And it's because I have a nice foundation layer of other inks underneath there. So what we have is a pulp of the paper that is kind of achieving, if not supersaturation, close to supersaturation, meaning that when I apply these inks over the top of this area that's where the pulp of the paper is really wet, that ink is kind of more, it's sitting more on the surface of the paper more, for a longer period of time. It's not getting absorbed in like this would be and is hard set, okay? So, kind of working through those lighter tones like that adds up to kind of an overall richer surface because you've really applied a great deal of ink, but it also makes the blending of colors when you get to those darker tones so much easier. When you get to a dark color, you don't want to have a bunch of like these shapes everywhere, right? Now, I wouldn't get those shapes, but if you did, you can just easily blend them out like so, okay? I can feel this ink when I'm applying it like this. I can feel it really, and see it too. I can feel it just pulling across that paper and blending out, so it's more like in line of this spirit right here. See, I can do this on a completely dry piece of paper too. See that? That's what's happening right there on the paper. So we get these nice, beautiful, easy transitions like this, okay? And that's where I mention in my videos and on the color application style, if you're using these tools like in this manner, just to keep a really nice light touch, okay? And see, I'm not trying to get this didn't happen with one stroke. It happened with like 20 or something like that. I always kind of make the analogy of in terms of the touch, maybe, imagine you're applying some makeup to like a, maybe not like a baby's face, you know, but maybe like a young child, like, you know, 5 or 6 years old or something like that. You know, you can kind of, you know, apply it with a little bit more force. You don't want to, you know, you don't want to rub their skin raw, but you also want to get that ink applied, or not, you know, makeup applied. So there's something like that. So that's about the pressure. I say that too because some people are ripping their tips like that, and it's because they're going too hard. Like what they'll do is they'll do this type of thing, and it's a very light stroke, right? It's not this dark. So they feel that the inclination is to press harder to get a darker mark, which is something that you can do, but it puts more pressure on your tips here. And I don't know, the applications aren't as kind of light and graceful. Not that they have to be, you know. There might be something to be said for going with a harder mark, but, you know, just keep in mind your media and your applicator, okay, what it's made out of. There's just some foam on here that's been somehow adhered to this plastic, so you don't want to have it peel, you don't want to have it tear, and you don't want to have it delaminate and peel off the back, which they eventually do, but we just don't want to kind of expedite that entire process. Okay, so we have that in there. It's a little bit more dramatic. This was a Prussian blue, by the way. Okay, so fairly vibrant though, huh? And saturated, considering this is a matte paper. I do like that matte look, you know, look at that. When you were done with it, it takes on kind of more of the feel, to me, of, it looks more satin finish to me than matte. You know, because of all those inks that have been laid down. Doesn't it look, you know, isn't there kind of a certain sheen to it? You know, when you apply all those inks like that, it's bound to get that. Oh, this one, right, you can see this one for me is, I don't know if you can tell right there, but it's starting to kind of bow a little bit. Okay, that means I used quite a bit of ink on here. Okay, so, alcohol inks. Let's play around with some alcohol inks here. I like to use really light shades, okay? And similar to the shades that have been applied with dye-based inks, if I'm kind of using both of them, okay? I can go darker, but let's start off with this one right here. I can get, you know, kind of more detailed areas. If I want to get the bottom sides of some of these rocks, I can do that. Or if I didn't get close enough to this boat or something, and I want, you know, some... This is really light, okay, so you can all barely tell that it's being applied in here. I can put an extra layer kind of in my darker areas, okay. You can apply alcohol on top of water-based, just like you can apply oil on top of water-based, but you can't go water-based on top of oil, or water-based, in this case, on top of alcohol. But I did that in my last piece right there, which I called floating ink, okay? It means that you know, look at that. This is really fun right here. See this right here? There's alcohol ink there, so if I apply this in here, see how it's like a eraser? It's because it's a lighter color than the color that's down there right now, so it's like a blender tool or something like that. It puts the alcohol ink back into solution. You can get those kind of alcohol ink looks in there. But anyways, I do like that floating ink because you can kind of play around with certain dynamics. You can apply some water-based on top of alcohol, and then you can go back in with like a Q-tip or something like that, or I did in the last video where I just wet my cosmetic sponge and I went back into that ink, and it spread the dye-based inks out that were on top of the alcohol inks. Now in this case I went dye-based inks and I'm putting the alcohol on top of it, but then we can probably go back in and put some dye-based ink over the top of that alcohol ink and then kind of manipulate that a little bit. I don't know, it's starting to get rather complicated for my kind of simple mind, you know, but I don't know, the possibilities are there. Okay, this is a little bit of green. We're moving into a little bit of a different tinge of a different hue in here. So I can kind of work it in. I like working it in from my direction that I applied my inks, water-based inks in, dye-based inks, just to kind of stay in that same spirit. But look at this. This is something where we can really hit like really specific areas like that. And see that little tinge of, warmth in there? Isn't that kind of nice? And then we can do some on these rocks right in here. So like these pens like this make the perfect accompaniment to water-based applications, because you can get really specific now in certain areas, especially if you have a nice range of values. Okay, let's see here. This one's a ice blue. This one's a shuttle art. Those other ones were Marvula Plume. You can use your Copics or kind of any type of alcohol markers here. You can kind of go in with this one. This one's a little bit darker. I don't like it how it's quite a bit darker, so it kind of shows up a little bit awkwardly. But then what you do is you just go back into a lighter one or use your blender tool and just kind of blend that in. And this one's a little bit bright too, but I'll blend out that even darker one. I kind of use some right at the base of some of these rocks. Going like so. Okay, let's see. Baby blue. This is a set of shuttle art pens that cost me $40 for 88 colors. Okay, the Marvy ones are a little bit more expensive. The La Plume permanents, but for me it's more kind of color based than brand based. I just want the colors that I want. Okay, I'm fine with mixing and matching. I don't really care about something like that. Okay, alright. Let's go into here. Azure blue. So you can go right across your trees and it's not going to, you don't need to worry about smearing or anything like that. They just kind of counterbend this a little bit. Alright. If you can want a tinge of some kind of warmth up there, you can do something like that. I don't want it yet yellow or something like that, though. What is this? This is pale blue. Boy, that one's... Did I already use this? This one's like barely visible. It's almost like you took a blender tool or something like that and used it. So, if you want a little bit of that, maybe you can put some of that up there, or maybe you can go into some of these other areas where I've applied a good coating of that alcohol ink and use this like a blender and do that thing where you kind of go back into it and it kind of makes it a little bit lighter out there. Actually, that looks pretty good. I like how alcohol inks, you can kind of go in there and put something back into solution. So if you have a mark that's been laid down, you can go back into the blender and go in there, and as that kind of alcohol kind of spreads out, it kind of picks up and moves some of that previously applied ink down. Or you can keep in one area like that and separate that color that you've laid down before, and it kind of puddles, on the perimeter of that mark for effect, so you can kind of go back in and reclaim some of the lighter tones that you might have applied down there. So like in here, in the lighter area, maybe I'll go back in here and go back into some of those streaks. So this little streak, I'm kind of extending that out that way. To me, it looks a little bit more, I don't know, the technique is not, but kind of the end result to me is in kind of more of the spirit of some really free form types of color applications like watercolor or something like that. And there's, I love watercolor looks, which I never do. I do like that look. I'm not a great watercolorist or anything like that. Okay, but anyways, see that kind of going down in that area right in there, and see how I've kind of taken this. I can use the blender tool too. This one happens to be so light I can use it like blending those. Oh, by the way, see how you can see where I've applied that alcohol mark. See that right there? It's absolutely visible. Now we won't see that type of textural contrast. Okay, if I spray this with a clear coat, it'll make that uniform for the most part. I can probably still see it a little bit if I held it up in the light or something of that sort, but that will all come together. We'll unify it some more. Okay, so at the base of this little canoe, see that there's a canoe. There's a shadow that I've drawn into this canoe. Okay, so I'm just going and reiterating that shadow right there. Doesn't that little shadow there with the pen kind of anchor that little person down into the scene a little bit more? And I can go into my kind of my water line where rocks meet water and go in with a little bit more of a darker blue like this. Okay, and let's see here. Let's see if we can add some little textural contrasts in here. Okay, so here we go. With that light source coming from above on the top surfaces of some of these rocks, I'll put a little dot or two, okay? The darker the rock, the less highlight I put on there. The lighter the rock, the more I put on there. Okay, so this is kind of a way to go back in and reiterate our general lighting scheme, okay? So you can see those rocks in there. See, it's just on the top surface. Right here, it's like one dot. Again, that's just using your gel pen, okay? The moonlight is coming from here. Watch what I do on these trees over here, okay? On the side of the tree that's facing the light, I need to get started on this Rubber Stamp Madness article on gel pens. But the scenes that I do for that article, I can't really show them until that article comes out, so I haven't done it yet. Okay, so here's so those trees right here on the side of the tree facing the light, I put those highlights on the left-hand side of all those trees, and where it moves into the darker area, less dots. So, let me put a couple on this one right here. It's getting really dark over there, so see this like 3 dots, 1 dot right there. See a little one right there? So when you look at it as a whole, it's lighter, close to light, and darker as it moves away, so you'd have less highlighting over there. Okay, so the opposite would go for these trees right over here. You put the highlights on the other side of the tree because the lighting is now on the other side of them, okay? If it's directly overhead, who cares? I mean, it's not to say that, oh, wait a minute, that light's there, so there wouldn't be a dot right there. It's not like that. But what I do is I just kind of, not oscillate, but I kind of taper, maybe, the usage of this off, so there's a little bit heavier in the lighter areas, okay? So this right here against that is fairly light, but these trees against this area is dark, so couple little dots over there, right? If you put an equal number over everything, okay, like this, it tends to look like Christmas lights, which you can put out there, you know, kind of cool. But if you want to go for kind of more of a natural kind of reference to the lighting scheme, then you just kind of, you know, you play around with your application of it. More in the lighter areas, okay? See this tree right here, I'll put a little bit more, as with this one right here. This one, these trees right over here are kind of directly underneath that moon, so maybe I could put a few more like that, okay? But now these trees out here get kind of dark, right? So I'll just do a few less highlights. Okay, now I have that little smudgy right there. I'll just kind of take that out with this little gel pen. It's like an eraser too, right? And light that is brighter than white in photography, they refer to as specular light. Not spectacular light, although it can look quite spectacular. You know, if you're at like a sunset and it's, you know, well, crystally things sparkles, you know, coming alive on the water. But specular light is light that's brighter than white, so it's typically like a reflection. Like if I held this right here, this is white right here, right? Because that's the color of this stamp pen. But the specular light would be like this right here. See, this right here is this direct reflection of my lamps that I have over my desk right now. You know, even up here, see this little line right there? That's reflected light. Okay, it's not white. So that's what these little things can represent right here in the water. Okay, those little shimmery little reflective flashes coming from that moonlight up there. Okay, so this, you know, not a real complicated scene, kind of going back to some more basics, and I wanted to just utilize a lot of different tools and things like that, and just reiterate a lot of these concepts and whatnot that I'm doing as far as lighting and color applications. You know, it can be done on other things. This one happens to be, you know, on matte paper, but I mean, it looks, you know, pretty similar to glossy. Let's see the difference between glossy though. Here's like a glossy with a similar color scheme, and this is matte. Yeah, it's not too much different, but you know, this one of course has that extra sheen on there, but you know, it's like amped up slightly when you say things that are, this was stamped in black right there, and that's in the same black right there on matte. So everything is just slightly dialed down in terms of the intensity and value going from glossy to matte. Okay, but I do like this look here, and I don't know. It's kind of a tactile thing too. It's kind of nice. It has that kind of satiny feel to it, but I just don't have, you know, access to maybe the darkest of darks from an existing ink. That, you know, darkest and brightest incarnation of its potential on matte paper. But I still think it looks really good though, you know. And I can do similar effects and whatnot. So going back to some of the similar processes and things like that from a lighting perspective, you know, when I'm going with, you know, different types of pens and things like this, or colored pencil on here, you know, I would typically start off with some lighter ones, and I work through my medium ones, and I didn't go too dark with my pens because I thought it would require a little bit more kind of a blending of those colors, but that's how I do it. I just start light and I work darker. It's kind of interesting though, because when you do go light, medium, dark, or something like that, using some of these pens with inks that are more surface oriented, they don't get absorbed into the paper and stain as much as a water-based dye would. When I go through light, medium, dark, I can go back to the lighter one and move around that darker one and blend it into the surrounding area. If not completely, you know, I could completely, not this one right here, I don't know, I have a blender. Yeah, here's my blender tool right here. I can go in with that blender and practically use it like an eraser and erase the alcohol marks that have been put down there. Sometimes with kind of more strategic effects than just wanting to get rid of it, I might want to lighten some area and to create a streak like I did over here back into, you know, kind of a darker area. If that's where I applied my darker thing. Yeah, see, when I start doing this, it starts putting that ink back into solution, and it starts to spread it out a little bit, and it starts to do that thing where it's kind of like alcohol inks do. It puddles up on that perimeter area like that. But I like that texture, especially in the context of water, a water scene or a water area within a scene. So it's really fun to do. This one's the blender tool, so you know, where I applied some of that green, you know, you can go for some more of that kind of cool textured alcohol ink areas like that. I don't know, it's kind of fun to just be able to manipulate the media that you've already laid down instead of it just being a completely additive process the entire you know, duration of the creation of whatever you're working on. So I always kind of play around with that a little bit. That's where the white pen comes into play. You know, you can kind of go back in, and you're not really reclaiming the white of the board, but you're just applying that white back into it. But with some of these processes like this, where you're working with kind of opposing mediums that don't mix, you can go back in and do that thing where you know, kind of move it around a little bit more. And I like having that capability. I'd rather have it than not, I guess. I don't know if I'll do it on every scene, though, you know, because I might not, you know, have an area that I care to do that with, but it's certainly fun. So anyways, I hope this video was enjoyable for you to watch. If you enjoyed it, maybe like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you on the next Stampscapes 101.